Welcome and thank you for joining our BensonLive event celebrating Chardonnay. My name is Taya Schlendorf of Benson Marketing Group, and I'll be serving as your moderator today. Of course, today is actually National Wine Day, and in 2 days' time, it will officially be Chardonnay Day. So in anticipation in celebration of that, today we're joined by a panel of winemakers who will be discussing this variety, which arguably should be crowned the monarch, if you will, the king or the queen of all white varieties. Just a couple of notes before we get started. Know that this presentation is being recorded and we'll share that with you after the fact. Please feel free to ask questions using the chat function and we'll work those into our conversation. Our winemakers are each going to be introducing their wines as they introduce themselves and talk a bit about their regions and winemaking. You're welcome to taste along with them as we do that, or of course, you're welcome to taste the wines on your own time. And as you've seen, we are sharing a Dropbox file that has all kinds of information on these wines and other things, other assets. So that's a great place to look for anything you might need. So a little bit more background to share before we get into the heart of the conversation today. First, a note about some of the Chardonnay wines in Benson's portfolio. We did our best to ship you examples of many of these wines, at least as many as the US's complex and often frustrating shipping policies allow. There are 4 wines which are represented by our panelists today, as mentioned, and then there are 3 others included here that I want to call out. 2 from the US, the Bailiana and True Myth Chardonnays from the Edna Valley, and another wine which we were unable to send out, but which is worthy of consideration, is the Montes Alpha Chardonnay from Chile. So more about some of these other wines from Hahn, Balletto, Biltmore, and Beck as we get into things. Just a couple more points that I think bear noting about Chardonnay from vineyard to store shelf. So first, in terms of plantings, as of a 2017 report from the OIV, Chardonnay was the 3rd most widely planted variety, white variety, globally at 210,000 hectares. So only Sultanina and Irene are more widely planted, but of course the wines they produce are not nearly as well known. In terms of crushing, in 2020 in California, Chardonnay still took a major lead in terms of tons of grape crush at 538,000 tons. And this is for any color grape variety. Cabernet Sauvignon happens to come in 2nd place. And then finally, when we make it to store shelves, in terms of wine sales, Chardonnay remains the top selling white variety. And in fact, 2020 was the first time it slipped from being the top selling variety all around, with Cabernet Sauvignon wine sales overtaking Chardonnay sales in the US market. And this is both in terms of volume and value. So this is why we say the case can really be made for Chardonnay to be the king or the queen of white grape varieties, if you will. So I now want to introduce each of our panelists one at a time and have them tell you more formally about themselves and their wines. So we are going to start in South Africa with Pieter Ferreira of Beck. And Pieter is the cellar master at Beck, located in the Robertson area of South Africa. The wine that we have today from him is the 2015 Beck Blanc de Blanc. So Pieter, take it away and tell us more about yourself and Beck and Robertson.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to join in on this sort of prestigious occasion, and obviously leading up to the Chardonnay Day, what a better way to remind ourselves the king of white grapes, Chardonnay. Yeah, I'm Pieter Ferreira. I'm the cellar master of a family-owned winery in South Africa. Those of you do know, South Africa sits on the southern tip of the Africa continent, and our winery is 100 miles due east of Cape Town. Now, if you do study a map, and it's something that I could provide as part of the presentation, just to give you a better idea of the location. We pretty much are surrounded by a valley of mountains, and this, makes our area very unique and also really conducive and great area for planting Chardonnay. Chardonnay over the years only arrived into South Africa in the mid-80s, and subsequently, Robertson, the area that our winery is situated in, is also known as one of the areas for planting Chardonnay in the Western Cape. So we have just under 9,000 acres of farm. It sounds like a lot, but we only have 700 acres under vineyards. We are a specialist producer of bottle fermented sparkling wine. In South Africa, if you do study the label, you will see we have a reference to Méthode Cap Classique. That is the reference we have for the champagne process. Champagne is a restricted name for wines coming from the Champagne region in France. We have developed a Cup for the Cape and the Classic for the traditional method. So that is the reference to Cap Classique on our label, and as you can see on the screen. We have a beautiful portfolio, seeing we are a specialist. This is all we do. We have a beautiful portfolio, but today we speak to you about the Blanc de Blanc. Blanc de Blanc is the reference to the blending and the selection process of our Chardonnay. This is 100% estate fruit from our Robertson area. Our Robertson area is known for three things. Sunshine, which is never a bad thing. It really helps to ripen our fruit to optimum ripeness. We have a high incidence of natural limestone in our soil, so we have much more sort of salinity and a little bit more mineral aromatics that is developed from the limestone. And then thirdly, we have a huge shift between day and night temperatures. It will be at least 35 degrees Fahrenheit on any given day, so we can have a 100-degree day, but at night it will be virtually around 70 and even less due to the continental shelf, and it's really conducive to keep natural acidity in the wine. In the process, all our grapes are hand selected and hand picked. We like to do whole bunch pressing, so the whole clusters will arrive to the press. We have a very soft way of getting our grapes into the presses, and then we will separate our cuvée fraction from our press fraction. And for our vintage Blanc de Blanc, we only use the quality fraction, so that remains separate. And 50% of this Chardonnay base wine would be fermented in barrel. We're not trying to give you an overtly oaky aromatic. It's more just there to give you texture, the creaminess, and just really more complex layers with the extra time on the lees. Our wine for the secondary fermentation spends 4 years on the lees prior to getting it ready for the market. Another interesting fact I would just like to point out, if you have a bottle with you, on the back label, we do show the date of disgorging, so that does help the consumer or the person who is enjoying the wine, that can work out, the freshness. First of all, it's a vintage dated on the front label. You can work out how long it's been on the lees and obviously how long it's been on the final cork. The wine shows a beautiful lime green tinge, which is very classic Chardonnay colors from the Robertson area. We have sort of a hint of lemons and limes as an initial start. I think it's due to the sort of natural freshness. We also don't do any malolactic in the wine. We'd like to retain the purity of the acidity. On the nose, you get that little bit of yeasty aromatics due to minimum 4 years on the lees. I think you can start seeing the sort of brioche notes starting to develop. And on the palate, you get that beautiful, fine, integrated bead of bubble, which is completely coated with beautiful aromatics, and it gives you a beautiful long and aftertaste. This wine is available in the US in some of the states, and it suggested selling price is $30. So I'd love to take any questions going forward, but I think that is my introduction to the wine. And I'm sure through some questions and answers, we'll speak again.
Thank you so much, Peter. Way to start off with some bubbles for the palate. And of course, you know, we have a wonderful lineup here because it really does highlight the diversity of styles that Chardonnay can produce. And so on that front, we are actually going to move to Northern California, to the Russian River Valley. There we are, to Anthony Beckman of Balletto Vineyards. And the wine that we have from Balletto today, and from Anthony, who is the vice president and winemaker for Balletto Vineyards, is the 2020 Teresa's Unoaked Chardonnay. So Anthony, please take it away and a bit more about everything.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to also comment on how awesome this lineup is. And from Peter's bubbles that we just tasted, which I think at that price point and 4 years in the bottle is incredible. And then we move into what I have, which is this sort of like unique non-barrel fermented Chardonnay, into some classic California Chardonnays with the Hahn, and finally Biltmore Chardonnay, which is like, for me, it's the classic East Coast winery. So it's really been fun for me to taste these wines and see them in the lineup. And it's really been like, we all know this, but when you taste these 4 wines together, you go, wow, Chardonnay can run this huge gamut of very delicious, very different styles and flavors. And for me, it's really fun because I don't see enough. I just don't see enough like Cap Classique wines in my life, and I happen to love them a lot. And same with Biltmore. You know, we all know these wines, but I just don't taste them enough. So this has been awesome for me. Quickly, the story of Balletto Vineyards really dictates how this wine, the Balletto Vineyards Teresa Chardonnay, it really dictates this wine. It's really the story of the family. So real quickly, when John Balletto was 17 years old, his father was diagnosed with cancer, and he was about to graduate high school and go on an athletic scholarship to college. His father passed away before graduation. John ended up with about $200 in his pocket, sold his GTO, which he loved, and purchased a flatbed truck and started farming 4 acres in his backyard that was planted to vegetables. This was 1977. From that time to the mid-80s, he grew that into 700 acres under vegetables, and then had a plot of land about 10 miles from the ocean, 400 or 500 feet elevation. It was too dry, it was too cold, you just couldn't get enough water there. And in the mid-90s, 1995, planted that vineyard to Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Gris. It was now what's called the Sebastopol Hills in the Russian River Valley. At that time, there was no grapes out there. Really, John was the trailblazer for this whole region, which now is considered one of the most prized locations in the Russian River Valley and Sonoma Coast. And you know, you have to go back to 1995 when there was absolutely nothing there. The wine itself also is part of the family tradition. Back in 2005, which was a year before I started, Terry Balletto did not like the direction the Chardonnay was taking. There was one Chardonnay being made at the time, and it was barrel fermented, and it had a pretty good oak impact. The barrels that were being used, it wasn't a lot of them, but the barrels were very what I would consider high impact oak barrels. And Terry goes to John Balletto and the winemaker at the time, you know, could we just please make a Chardonnay that has no oak in it? And so again, the advantage of being estate grown, the very next morning, they picked 5 tons of Chardonnay, they fermented it in the tank, and throughout its fermentation, everybody said, oh, how's Terry's tank? You know, how's Terry's Chardonnay? What's the bricks on Terry's Chardonnay today? How does the fermentation on Terry's Chardonnay smell? And so The name stuck, and so it's Teresa's Chardonnay, and it is still unoaked. And what I love about this wine is twofold. The first part is when you're estate grown and estate bottled, I've now been making this wine. I'll be coming up on my 15th vintage of making this same wine, and I'm making it from the same exact rows in the same exact block in the same everything. And I know where I know where the vines are strong. I know where they're weak. I know where you need to put an extra cane in. I know where you need to take out an extra cane because the vines can't have it. And really it's this intimate knowledge, I believe, of the land that has given me the great opportunity to spend, the last 14 vintages and soon to be 15. I just walked it this morning, making the Teresa's Unoaked Chardonnay. So that's the first part of it. And the second part of it is, I feel like with this knowledge of what the wine should be, I'm really out to capture what I consider essence of Chardonnay. Pretty, bright, floral. I mean, the aromatics on this are really quite lovely. And it goes back to what Terry Balletto said back in 2005. Let's take the oak out of the Chardonnay completely. And when you do that, it really captures what I think of as essence of Chardonnay. That day when you have whole cluster press and you load it up and the juice comes out of the press, it's about the most delicious thing, ever. And to me, that really is the core of this wine. And it's also in the lineup of wines, I do six different Chardonnays, 7 if you include the sparkling wine that we do. And this wine, it starts on the far, like very pretty, very lean, very focused, lots of floral, and then it runs the whole gamut to things that are, much richer, much more tannin, actually a lot of structure. And this is that first entry into Chardonnay. This wine, when I started, was 300 cases production, and we're now about 3,400 cases production. It's our largest production case count production that we do on Chardonnays. And if you come to Sonoma County, this is in every restaurant you pop into. It is very, very prevalent everywhere here. And it's just so much fun to make. I really enjoy making this every year. Some wines are really, you sweat every little thing because it's really hard to make. This wine, it's just, you don't do anything. It just kind of makes itself, and that makes it really fun. And again, 2020, just released, it bottled in February, and it is out and around. And don't let that fool you, it will age really well. We've done 10-year verticals of this, and the stuff from the early teens is awesome still. So again, Chardonnay, really essence of Chardonnay, and the wine that I drink all the time.
Thank you, Anthony. Yeah, and so now we're going to move back across the country to North Carolina, in fact. And we're going to hear from Sharon Fenchak, who is the Vice President of Winery Production and head winemaker at Biltmore Winery. So interestingly, she's working both with estate fruit from North Carolina on the property there, as well as grapes from trusted growing partners in California and Washington. So really seeing a whole spectrum of things. The wine that we have today is the 2019 Biltmore Reserve Chardonnay from North Carolina, from that fruit on the estate. So Sharon, take it away. Tell us more about that.
Sure. Thank you, Thea. And I really appreciate all of the enthusiasm in this group from all the other winemakers. It's great to hear that everyone is just as passionate about Chardonnay as I am. Just a little history about Biltmore. The Biltmore estate, of course, was built in 1895, and we're located in Asheville, North Carolina. And the Vanderbilt family is the original family and still owns the estate today. So that's kind of a fun fact for people that have not visited Biltmore. If you have not visited Biltmore, I welcome everyone to come and visit the estate. It's an amazing French-style chateau. So on the estate, we have about 8,000 acres, and we also have a winery. So the present day winery actually started in 1985, but we started to plant grapes in the early 70s, right near the Biltmore Estate House. During that time, it was experimental, and we actually planted a lot of hybrids, things that we were just kind of experimenting with to see what would grow. And then the decision was made to actually only plant Vitis vinifera grapes on the present day vineyard. So at that time, in the 80s, we had around 200 acres of vines. And through the years, we've decided that 50 acres of vines is where we should be at this point in time. On the East Coast, we can have a lot of interesting weather. I call it interesting in quotations. And so interesting meaning like a late freeze that can just wipe out your harvest. We have a lot of humidity and different problems with downy and powdery mildew. So the crew that works in the vineyard, Phillips Oglesby as our vineyard manager, he does an excellent job of taking care of the vines, but it does take a lot of hard work to make sure that we can get a crop in the southeast of the United States. So the idea of growing something organic in the southeast just really doesn't exist, because you have to use the normal spray schedules and the sprays that you would need for a lot of humidity and rain and these different factors that can come into play. So in a year where we can get really great grapes, I feel that the vineyard can produce a really high quality product. So on the present day vineyard, we have Chardonnay, Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and a little bit of Petit Mansang that we're growing on the vineyard property. When I started to work at Biltmore in 1999, the Chardonnay that we had planted, and at that time we had around 100 acres, was mostly clone 4 Chardonnay, the old Winty clone Chardonnay that everyone kind of grew in the United States. And I did some research on some different varietals or some different clones. And we decided that clones 76, 96, and 95 were good clonal selections for our vineyard. So the Chardonnay that we're tasting today has all those different clones in this particular Chardonnay. So we have clone 4, clone 76, 96, and 95. And we're finding that the Dijon clones, the newer clones that we planted, actually have a little bit more acidity than the clone 4. And they're more suited for the environment that we have here in Asheville, North Carolina. So our model and structure is probably a little different than some of the other winemakers on the panel. As Thea mentioned earlier, we produce about 10 to 15% of our production is North Carolina fruit. And then we'll also buy from other North Carolina vineyards around the state. The other portion, or 85 to 90% of the rest of our portfolio, comes from California and Washington. So I'm really excited to be able to work with all of these grapes from all over the United States. And we'll buy fruit from Georgia, Virginia, all of these, Oregon, all these different areas, if it's something that we want to try and are interested in seeing what our consumers will think about the actual wine or grapes themselves. So going back to Chardonnay, we produce our North Carolina Chardonnay, which we're tasting today, our Biltmore Reserve. We also produce a non-oak Chardonnay, which is in our Antler Hill series. And then we also do a Chardonnay sur Lys, which is traditional method of stirring the lees in the tank. So that's something that was handed down. The winemakers prior to me at Biltmore were all French. And so that's a method that they incorporated into a lot of our process. And also a similar process is found with the North Carolina Chardonnay. So harvest for us at Biltmore, we typically will have to harvest, I hate to say this, based on the weather, not necessarily based on the grape. So often the weather, September is usually when we'll harvest our Chardonnay. Will determine when we'll have to pick. We can have these crazy hurricanes that come off the Gulf Coast, and we might be getting a lot of rain or other weather coming in. But in a good year, and when I say good year, a drought, we'll pick on the bricks and the acidity, as you would with any other winery. So bricks in North Carolina are a little different than California bricks, as we consider something ripe. In North Carolina, when we get to around 20 bricks, we're doing really well with ripeness. You know, the seeds are brown, we're ready to pick the grapes, the acid's right, the flavor's there. It would be very rare in North Carolina to have something that you would reach 24 bricks. So when I first started to work at Biltmore, I saw the hydrometer or the bricks reading around 24, 26, and I thought it was a mistake, you know, so I had to go back and check it several times. And then I was pleasantly surprised that it was not a mistake and the acid was really good. So you have to be very creative as a winemaker when you're dealing with North Carolina fruit. But normally every year we'll be able to produce a really good quality Chardonnay. In exceptional years, we will actually do a North Carolina sparkling, our Chateau Reserve. So we will actually be releasing a 2019 Chateau Reserve, hopefully in January 2022. So we're not like Peter and age things for 4 years. I would love to do that, but you know, that's really, really super fun. So maybe we'll be able to age some sparkling in the near future. So the wine itself, kind of like sparkling wine, we will remove the free run or lighter pressed fraction from the hard pressed fraction of this particular wine. And we'll put the pressed fraction or the harder pressed fraction into another tank. So this is the premium quality juice that you're getting in the North Carolina Reserve Chardonnay or Biltmore Reserve. What we'll do then is we'll actually put the wine into a tank and we'll start the fermentation process for about 2 days, 2 to 3 days, make sure all the yeast are, you know, going in a good way. If we have to add any sugar, we can add sugar in North Carolina. So if the bricks are really low in a certain year, we're legally allowed to in North Carolina add sugar, just like in California, they're allowed to add concentrate. So we would adjust up accordingly. Typically, I want the alcohol around 13%, 12.5, 13% alcohol. And we'll start the fermentation process, and then we'll transfer that wine that's fermenting in stainless tanks to barrels. So we'll barrel ferment all of our Biltmore Reserve North Carolina Chardonnay. So it's different than the wine you just tasted because you do pick up hints of oak, a little bit of butter. You know, I don't allow all of this wine to go through malolactic fermentation. Only about half of the wine will go through ML. So I still want that nice balance of apple and butter, you know, the apple from the malic, the butter from the lactic, so that it all balances out. And we'll stir the barrels just like we would do for the Surlees process. And that adds another level of mouthfeel to the particular barrel and to the particular wine. So it really kind of rounds it out and brings all of those great lees up in contact with the wine at the top. We'll allow this wine to age for about 6 to 8 months in the barrel, and then we'll bring it out of barrel and we'll bottle it. Something fun that we're trying with the wines from, or the harvest from 2021, we actually had some Biltmore oak harvested, and we have barrels from that oak that we're allowing our 2020 North Carolina Chardonnay to age in this year. So it's that whole connection to place and coming back to Biltmore. George Vanderbilt, the founder of the Biltmore Estate, he traveled from all over the world and brought back all of these great things to the estate property. So, you know, the North Carolina, the idea is that we're sustainable property. We have a farm to table program, we have beef on property, all of these different products that we bring back to our guests. But also, you know, he traveled all over the world and brought the best things back. So that's kind of how I think about our West Coast wine program, is we're just bringing the best back to our consumers here on the East Coast. So if you have the wine available, I invite you to smell and taste it. You get some oak, some vanilla, a little caramel, touch of butter. And what you're going to find from a lot of North Carolina Chardonnay or wine in general from North Carolina is we're not going to have a lot of really big acid in the wine. And that's because just the temperature and the situation we're in the mountains here in North Carolina. So we'll have deviation from day and night temperature. I think Peter mentioned that earlier, but not as extreme as California or some other areas in the world. So I hope you've had an opportunity to taste the wine, and I invite you all to visit Biltmore. Thank you.
So much, Sharon. Definitely excited to get down there again, hopefully.
Yeah.
But right now, we're going to traipse back across the US to California to the Santa Lucia Highlands, to Hahn Family Wines and Paul Clifton. Paul is the director of winemaking for Hahn Family Wines, leaders in the Santa Lucia Highlands there. And today we have the 2018 Hahn SLH Chardonnay. And just take a look at that beautiful California sunshine in the back of Paul's view there. Paul, take it away and tell us more about all of this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Thea. Thank you for having me. This is I'm learning so much just listening to our outside of California contingency on this call. Pretty amazing the challenges that Sharon is talking about, and God, you learn so much doing that. I kind of envy you. It's a constant challenge, but a little bit about Hahn. So Hahn is family owned. Nicky Hahn, or the Hahn family, is Swiss German, and they came looking for Nicky came looking for property really all over the world to start a winery for his children. And he settled, he didn't want to really go somewhere that was already established. He wanted to try to pioneer something. So he loved Monterey area. He loved golfing. He and his wife loved golfing, and they fell in love with the Salinas Valley and settled on buying some property here in what is now called the Santa Lucia Highlands. It's in the Salinas Valley up on the western. So it's a mountain coastal mountain range that stretches from Monterey Bay down to about San Luis Obispo. And on the west side of the mountain range, you have the Big Sur coastline. On the east side of the mountain range, you have an alluvial fan that kind of jets out over the Salinas Valley. The Salinas Valley itself is a massive farming community in terms of agricultural leafy greens on the valley floor, very fertile, beautiful soils for growing vegetables. And most of America's vegetables come from this area. But up on this alluvial fan that sits up above the valley floor, it's all decomposed metamorphic rock. And it's super well drained. Vegetables don't grow well up there. It was used back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s as cattle for cattle grazing, and then in the 70s people started planting grapes up there, and that's when Nicky got involved. And in the late 70s, and he in 1979 he bought his first two properties here in Monterey. And then expanded. So we have 4 different vineyards here in the Santa Lucia Highlands, and it's basically a valley that stretches north to south. Massive coastal influence. I was telling Peter earlier that this is the first morning I've seen sun in a couple weeks. Usually every morning it's foggy here, and it burns off usually around 11 or so, and that fog really has a huge impact for varieties like Chardonnay and Pinot, which are mostly planted in the Santa Lucia Highlands. And it kind of retains that acidity. So a lot of times we're waiting, especially for Chardonnay, waiting for the acid to come down low enough before we pick. We're not picking on sugar really at all. In fact, the sugar sometimes can creep up a little bit higher than you want while you're waiting for that acid to come down, just because we get these really cool nights Every night is the same temperature of the ocean, which is about 50, 52 degrees. So that really helps retain the acidity, but also extends our, kind of time to pick. So, so it's kind of a unique area in that way, that we're just waiting for the acid to come down to a level where it's not going to just peel the enamel off your teeth. So usually when we get down to around 7 or 8 grams, that's when we pick it. And usually the sugar is around 24, 25 at that stage. And we do a whole cluster press on this, and then it's 100% barrel fermented, and we're using a combination of neutral barrels and about 30% new French oak. So over the years, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, after I'm done with this segment in the Q&A about all the different styles of Chardonnay there are. I mean, we're tasting a number of them right here, a huge range of them. But I was kind of going after kind of a balanced style with this. So 30% new French oak. It goes through ML, and I do keep some ML negative in a tank in case it gets too much of that buttery characteristic. So we can kind of tone that back down to a level that makes it more balanced. I don't want to like what we were talking about earlier. Anthony was talking about the essence of Chardonnay. Well, I really love that essence. I really love that unoaked style. But, I also got to think about what the consumer likes. So I'm trying to find this like niche of, having that essence, but also surrounding it with layers of a little bit of oak that's not going to be overpowering. Because people like oak too. So that's my take on Chardonnay, and it's very complicated. And yeah, SLH Chardonnay.
Thank you, Paul. And hang on one second. You would think I never worked a Zoom before. Thank you all for all of these descriptions of your regions, of your wines. And it is time to get into our discussion of this variety. And I want to start with a question. There was a time, we're here to celebrate Chardonnay today, but there was a time when ABC, anything but Chardonnay, was kind of the tagline of the day. Do we think that Chardonnay still suffers a little bit from this kind of bad rap or tired rap in the minds of the consumers, given that, as we just pointed out, it can be produced in so many different styles?
I'll take that one. I think that there is a little bit of that out there, and what we always do in the tasting room when somebody comes up and makes that comment, oh, I don't like Chardonnay. This is the wine that we pour for them, because it is, so different than what they expect, this, stereotypical Chardonnay style, especially when we're talking California, which is, a little bit sweet, a lot of oak, not a lot of acid, lots of like viscosity and a little bit of heaviness, sort of, this very, what I would consider average Chardonnay. I think of Chardonnay having the classic bell curve. And so, when you get down here, there's a few down here that are like undrinkably bad. The vast majority are right in the middle of that bell curve, like 95%, right? And then down here, the really tail end, which is where we all want to be, the four of us I know, that's where the Chardonnay really, really shines. And I think you have to show people that so that they can understand what Chardonnay does, right? Because there's a big middle and there's a lot of it, and it's getting cranked out all the time. No, we want to be here and we want to showcase Chardonnay at the very, very tail end where there's not a lot on this bell curve. And I think one of the problems with the perception of Chardonnay is, number one, it's really hard to get down there. I mean, let's face it, that's the biggest challenge of my year every year, is how do I make that Chardonnay that's really at the fine tail end of this very steep bell curve. And second is, number one, it's hard to do it. And number two, there's a lot of people who are content to what I consider make a Chardonnay that is in the big part of the curve. And so, yes, I think there's a challenge for people to say, look, Chardonnay is this incredible, great. And when you do it right, and when you do it with vision, you get down here and it is like, you know, some of my most favorite wines in my life have been Chardonnay. And I've yet to get to where I want to be. You know, I think I have 20 more vintages left before I'm too old to lug hoses around. And I hope that sometime in the next 20 years, I'll do one Chardonnay. You know, I mean, that's how hard it is. And that's what we're after. And that's the goal. And I think, and I'll throw this question out to the rest of you. Have you guys changed your Chardonnay winemaking in the last 10 vintages? I mean, I know I have, but I'll throw it out there to you all to see if you think you're like chasing that little thing, or if you're in the middle, or kind of what your thoughts are.
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
No, go Paul, go Paul, go Paul.
Yeah, when I first started at Hahn, like 19 years ago, I did not like any of the Chardonnays that were being made. It was really over the top for me, and so we've made a lot of adjustments, and we're constantly making adjustments. You know, it's like trying to figure out the variety and what people want. It's all over the spectrum. It's like throwing darts, and I haven't figured it out yet. I love this wine, but is it like the pinnacle yet? No. I think I need another 20 years to figure it out too. So go for it, Peter.
I do agree. You know, obviously I started from a clean slate when I joined the Beck family and Robertson, but you know, already Chardonnay was starting to make its name, and I just realized how flexible and how pliable Chardonnay is. It's extremely versatile. You can make the most beautiful sparkling wines out of it. You can have a beautiful unoaked version, and you can have it semi-oaked, you can have it fully oaked. But as long as you understand, you know, your success really lies what happens in the vineyard. We are keeping to find better locations, we're finding higher altitude due to climate change, all playing a role. So, you know, I feel sorry for people who say ABC, you know, anything but Chardonnay. Those days are gone. You know, I refer to it as a CBA. Chardonnay is back again.
Yeah, and Peter, I agree with you also. And just on Chardonnay's back again also. I didn't really know that it went away. So, you know, in North Carolina, we were still strong on it. So that's great. And just the versatility of the grape. As Peter mentioned, we have a sparkling, we have unoaked, half oaked or all oaked, but half mallow, and then a full mallow, and mallow added, or non-mallow added after if it's too much mallow. So you have all these different versions of Chardonnay. And, you know, just discussing how Peter and I probably pick at a way lower bricks, he for sparkling and me just because in North Carolina, and Anthony and Paul picking at probably 22 to 25 bricks, depending on the particular year. So it's an amazing grape. There's all these different fantastic clones out there. How we've changed at Biltmore over the years is just in our clonal selection and specifically planting to get what we want out of that varietal. So that's the thing that I'm most proud of, is the fact that we've, you know, changed our grapes to meet what we think our consumer would want to actually taste.
That's yeah, that's a good point, Sharon. I think there was an interesting point we brought up in our sort of practice discussion, that, you know, there may be a disconnect between the consumer, a gatekeeper like a SOM or a retail salesperson, and the producer in terms of what each part of this tier is looking for. And Anthony, maybe you could speak a little to that, because the Teresa's unoaked was the first time you produced it was sort of at the height of this oaky chard ABC kind of time period, and it was almost a reaction to that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple things that can sort of go into this. You know, talking about what consumers want. because we're estate grown and family owned, we have the advantage of, I have this theory, and I'm sorry, this is gonna go a little sideways, but I have this theory that, you know, it's really hard to define quality in wine because everybody tastes it differently. I mean, there's certainly stuff that's bad and we can all agree it's bad, but it's really hard to define quality. So I look at the wine world as consistency of style is really quality. So when we started the Teresa Chardonnay in 2005, and then once I got here in 2000 for harvest, finishing the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th, and sort of got my wheels under me, it became really apparent that there wasn't a huge market for this wine. You know, everybody was still in the much bigger style of Chardonnay. But when you're taking the long picture and when you're thinking consistency of style as a quality indicator, you know, in 10 years, this was our biggest production wine, and we didn't do anything different. You know, it still had no sugar, it still had no oak. It was this really pretty focused style of Chardonnay, and we made our own consumer base. I mean, we truly did, and it took 10 years. And it was, you know, scrape, and we'd be behind on vintages, and you'd have to put some ridiculously low by the glass out because you'd be a couple of vintages behind, and you just like want to cry because you're like, why aren't people drinking this wine? I love this wine. And we did that, and we did that, and we pounded, you know, it was like banging your head against the consumer wall, boom, boom, and like, no, this is it, you know, pound, no, try this, boom. And it took 10, 15 years, it truly did. And it was a re-education, I think, of the consumers, especially our core consumers, to have them say, look, try the Chardonnay. And what it also did was, once people said, oh, I love this Chardonnay, their eyes opened up and they go, well, what's this single vineyard Chardonnay? You know, if the price is triple, it's a $45 bottle of wine. You know, what's the difference between us? And then you go, oh, well, try it. You know, you can understand it. You put the two side by side, and they're both great examples. But the Teresa's opened the door, really, you know, at the $20 price point, it opened the door to sell these $40 Chardonnays from single vineyard sources that were barrel fermented. So I don't know. I hope that answered the question. I kind of went around in circles, so I tend to do that. I need the cane. You know, you guys can always give me someone cut them off signal, and I'll accept that. I have no problem. I have no shame.
No, that was great. Maybe Sharon, you can speak to that a little bit too. I know you're, you know, in the winery there, the winery, the tasting room that people can come visit. You have, well, at least before we had a pandemic, a tremendous amount of visitors. You know, and it was often a place where a lot of those visitors were kind of first experiencing wine. Given it's the southeast of the United States, it's not the same sort of environment as like California on the West Coast. And how did those sort of consumer perceptions end up playing into your winemaking as well?
Right, and I'm gonna say it is raining really, really hard here, and so I know that the people in California are probably a little jealous. So if you hear like little sprinkles, that's what's going on, okay? So Thea, yes, North Carolina and, you know, Asheville in general and Biltmore, you know, it's not like California, and I've honestly never been to South Africa, so I apologize, Peter. You're gonna have to invite me to come, and I'll come over and see the wines and the vineyards and everything. But a lot of people in the Southeast, you know, haven't really tasted a lot of wine. So when they come to the winery, as Thea mentioned, we serve as almost an educational tool to people visiting, introducing them maybe to the first time they've ever tasted wine. So we have 45 different wines that we have, sometimes over 45 at the actual winery itself. So having that versatility and range of product is so important to us. So we don't necessarily have like a sweeter Chardonnay, but that might be the introduction to somebody that's never had a Chardonnay. But we do have, like, for instance, our Caneros Antler Hill Chardonnay is extremely dry, you know, no barrel, you know, and so that's not something that we would introduce somebody that's never tried wine before 2. We would go with like a Gewürztraminer, a Riesling, a Chenin Blanc, okay? As you get into a little bit more mallow and less acidity, that consumer is okay with something that might have some barrel age or a little bit more mouthfeel, or they might perceive it as sweetness, even though it's not necessarily sweetness. So we have this whole range of product that we can offer our consumer. And so when I spoke about the Dijon clones, especially clone 76, it can come off as aromatic, you know, a little bit more fruit forward. And so that was one of the choices for that particular clone in the North Carolina Chardonnay. But we have everything from dry whites to super sweet whites and reds to sparkling. So that whole range of product for the consumer. So there's something for everyone, you know. The first time somebody comes to the winery, they may not pick Chardonnay because it might be too dry for them. But the hope is that if they pick something really sweet, that eventually in 5 years from now, or a few years from now, you know, they're going to become loyal customers of Biltmore and want to come back and try something a little bit more dry. And there's nothing wrong with sweet wines. I mean, some of the best wines in the world are sweet, but you know, that's the goal, is that we kind of take that consumer through their whole wine history and then bring them back around. And like 15 years from now, they're buying our Antler Hill Cabernet. So that's what we ideally want in when all of our consumers. But if they choose not to, we're welcome to it also. You know, our limited release Chenin Blanc with 4% residual sugar is one of our best sellers here at Biltmore. So we're very proud of that product also. Thea, did I answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. And it's a good gateway to another one, which, you know, you touch on. There's so many different styles. And on the one hand, that could be a challenge for the consumer to understand what style of Chardonnay it is they're getting in a bottle. So I want to put this question to both Paul and Pieter, because we can't forget, you know, that the greatest sparkling wines in the world are made from Chardonnay as well. You know, how do you handle or help to communicate what style it is that the consumer is getting, probably through your packaging or through the way the wine is introduced or sold, so they understand, you know, Paul, in your case, sort of what level of oak they might be getting, or malolactic, and Pieter also, you know, how that extra aging or dosage might play into things.
To me, it's really easy. As I mentioned, the versatility of Chardonnay, it allows the story just to continue to grow. You know, you can, you know, at Beck in the portfolio of Bubbly, you know, we have our non-vintages, which is equally blended with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. But I mean, the go-to really in the sort of higher end into the vintages, definitely Chardonnay plays a major role. And I think in South Africa, the story of Chardonnay is a little bit more understood, maybe, because remember, our market's so much smaller than that of the whole of the United States, is that the consumer has a reasonable expectation when you speak Chardonnay. You know, we've also come through the sort of ABC, because Sauvignon Blanc was the hot favorite of the month. It's sort of fallen on the wayside, and people are rediscovering Chardonnay for that matter. But I think the message lies in branding and the story. I think today the most important part of selling wine is the story you give the customer the opportunity to buy into. So, you know, I think it's got to do with the branding, and, you know, I'd love to hear what Paul says.
Yeah, well, I'll answer Richard's first question he had on the chat. There was the advantages or challenges of working with a family-owned winery or vineyard, and it depends. Depends on the family. There's, you know, I I fell in love with the Hans the first day I met him. You know, I see Anthony's been around for a long time working for them. It's, you know, it just depends. So there's some families that are great to work for. There's some that are, you know, they're tougher. But on the Chardonnay front, yeah, it's, you know, the expectations of a consumer vary, I think, depending on where you are geographically. You know, I remember, you know, a number of years ago, I was back on the East Coast and I saw, you know, a lot of females love Pinot Grigio there. Here on the West Coast, it's all Chardonnay. It's like totally different. So I think there's some geographical differences that we haven't really understood yet in terms of the expectations of Chardonnay. Here in California, you know, people are thinking, well, yeah, it's going to be an oak bomb, butter bomb. I mean, we talked about there's labels that have butter on them, and it's like saying, hey, you know, this is what you're getting. But there's the reverse of that too. So and it could be very geographical. In fact, I was just last week, I got a call from a company that has been doing for the last couple of years, they've been doing studies on tasting profiles of consumers, and they break it down by geography. So I'm kind of fascinated by that. They're using like AI, and it's pretty crazy technology they're using, but just kind of see what people like where, you know. There's a lot of differences, I think.
And Paul, just to let you know that a lot of men like Pinot Grigio too.
Yeah.
Yes. Me too. Me too. I just remember the distributors are like, yeah, it's all these women are buying up Pinot Grigio by the, you know, just like pulling it off the shelf.
Yeah.
And in like 1.5s, and I was like blown away when I was there. I was like, holy smokes.
We for Pinot Grigio, for us, it has for wholesale, like supermarkets, it's one of our #1 sellers. And so we started to do Pinot Grigio maybe 10, 12 years ago, before it was super popular. And it's just grown tremendously. So yeah, it's the very versatile wine also for a many different range of production. So it's awesome. But yeah, I know a lot of my guy friends love some Pinot Grigio. So
me too.
I want to come back and stay on this. We're coming up to our sort of time cap here, but I want to encourage this conversation to continue, because we still have quite a few questions that we'd love to ask. And I want to stay with sparkling wine just for a minute here. You all are producing sparkling wines, traditional method sparkling wines. And so I just want to spend some time talking about what it is that makes Chardonnay so good. First, like, it is the grape to make a really high quality sparkling wine out of. So Peter, what are your thoughts on that? What is it that sets it apart?
I think we must remember that Chardonnay is an early ripening variety. So, you know, again, it gives you the versatility. I think we talked about ripeness levels. Sharon talked about the ripeness levels as well, you know, and I can't remember. It was Anthony that you pick rather on acidity, or who said that? Was it Paul?
That was
You
Paul.
rather look at this.
Same boat too.
Yeah, Paul was looking at the acidity rather than the sugar level. I think for sparkling wine, you know, with the early ripening variety, is you know, you have sufficient hanging time to get the primary aromatics of Chardonnay, and then you know, it just happens to be the king of grapes. What I really like, because I have traveled many sparkling wine areas through the world, is just, again, it shows the diversity. You know, you just have to look at Champagne as the sort of benchmark where, you know, the things virtually just stand in chalk, and it can give you one thing, and then you can have you know, loamy conditions, you can alluvial conditions, but they all really work well. So for me, it's the question of your geographical area as such, where I would just be doubtful to do a full mellow style in the area like Robertson, where, you know, we have extremely warm days, is that, you know, should we go a full mellow style in our sparkling wine on Chardonnay, we will have to add acidity. And that's the last thing I would like to do. I try and stay on the natural side of winemaking and rather protect the natural acidity by not doing mellow. So, you know, that is my sort of take and sort of contribution out of our, you know, experience.
And I would agree that, to me, sparkling and Chardonnay, it's really acidity. You know, for reference, it's a partial Pinot, 60%, 50, it's pretty much 50-50, but it'll go 10% either way between Pinot and Chardonnay. I will pick the Pinot for sparkling as the very, very, very first thing that I pick. Like, the Pinot is way ahead of the Chardonnay. I'll pick the Pinot, I'll taste it, and then I'll decide where I want to pick the Chardonnay. So the Chardonnay is coming from Sebastopol Hills, actually from that vineyard that John Balletto first planted in the mid-90s. And if I pick that at 20 brix, which is sort of the range, you know, 19 to 21, it's a 2.9 pH and like an 11 TA. And it is hard to drink. I mean, literally, it's hard to taste because it is so tart. I have to send that through ML. So the Chardonnay, while the Pinot is tank fermented and no ML, the Chardonnay is neutral barrel fermented and full ML, because it is it's just too much otherwise. I mean, it's a real aggressive, and that's what I think, though, Chardonnay does for sparkling, because then you have the chance to hit it with the dosage, you know, a couple grams, and it makes a big difference, and the bubbles, you know, kind of enhance everything. And to me, it's all about minerality and acidity, and not so much mouthfeel, but just this like laser beam. You know, it's like I always think of the Chardonnay portion as the laser beam. It's just focused and perfect.
One last thing, if I may, just on that point. Champagne has made lots of studies, and they looked at the individual, you know, their three main varieties, Meunier, Pinot Noir, and Chardonnay, and they looked at the effect of time on the lees, and Chardonnay is a very slow starter on time on the lees. So when you're producing a sparkling wine with Chardonnay, you will build longevity for sure. It's a given fact. And if it's 100% Chardonnay, you can add another 5 years to the wine's life at the end of the day. So Chardonnay definitely brings longevity into sparkling.
And just thinking about like the grape in general, I mean, it's a varietal that you can do something with when it's not ripe. You know, I mean, it's like, it's not ripe. You wouldn't be making a good still wine to bottle if you picked it with sparkling numbers. So, you know, I mean, that's the beauty of it, is that, you know, when something is unripe, something, Anthony, as you mentioned, you normally wouldn't want to drink like with your Pinot Noir for sparkling. You could still make great sparkling with it. Chardonnay is the same. So it's just like, I mean, that's why champagne was champagne, right? Because the grapes couldn't really get super ripe. And so just the beauty of that and understanding the nature of the grape and what you can actually do with it as a winemaker, and not trying to force it. You know, the worst thing you can do, I think, if you have grapes, is to try to make it into something it's not. In North Carolina, we often have, you know, a year we can't make red wine from our red grapes, so we make rosé or we make sparkling. Normally it's rosé, not sparkling, because the grapes probably aren't the best quality. But for me, when I think about sparkling grapes, it's perfect grapes. You know, I don't want any flaws in the grape itself. I want perfection when I'm picking the sparkling grapes. With still wine, you know, we can have a little whatever, we can fix it later. But with sparkling, I want neutrality, just slight aromatics, great acid, low bricks, and just something that's unique that you would use for sparkling. So that's why I appreciate the grape.
Okay, let's we'll go to a final question where we're going to forecast, looking into the future. Would love to hear from each of you on what you see as the future of Chardonnay. Are there any variations or styles as of yet unexplored, or trends that we might predict will come and then probably go? So who'd like to start with that?
Come on, Paul, you know you want it.
Yeah.
I have no idea. Maybe like a Chardonnay beer or something. I don't know. I think everything's been explored.
The one thing that's super popular is cocktails, like cocktails for younger millennials or the next generation. But I'm not a fan of super cocktails with wine, but I know people love them,
Yeah.
So maybe we'll go back to the 80s where we do like,
Wine cooler, Chardonnay wine
cooler Chardonnay.
Bartles and James will come back,
right.
right? The two
Well,
old
there is
guys.
that.
They'll be really old now, sitting on the porch.
There is
Well,
that.
I hope that we stay with tradition, because I think Chardonnay is one of those classic traditional grapes that will hopefully go through time and remain kind of in this style, because it hasn't really changed that much since I've been in the industry, 20 plus years. So it's just, I don't know. What do you guys think? I don't see it really. I hope it doesn't change too much, because I enjoy it the way it is.
I'm talking to the people who are planting grapes in Sonoma Coast and Russian River Valley, Chardonnay specifically. Number one is that people are really trying, they're moving away from a lot of oak. I think there's still barrel ferment. There's a lot of, indigenous fermentation going on, indigenous malolactic going on. There's a lot of people pushing the limits on picking earlier, especially in our section of Russian River Valley, Sebastopol Hills, a coastal range. I see the Chardonnays getting pushed, and I think we're pushing it now where it becomes much more serious wine. I think the tannin, if you start drinking Chardonnays now, there's so much tannin in these Chardonnays. You don't usually think of white wines as having tannin. But I'm tasting these wines from all my fellow winemakers in the region. There's tannin, there's structure. It's starting to almost taste like a red wine. There's a ton of acidity. The oak is played down. I think the future, and I say this because this is what I want the future to be. I'm not sure if this is what the future really will be, but I think we'll see a seriousness of Chardonnay start to show, and people will start to make Chardonnays that go 10 or 12 years or longer, like no problem, all the time. More structured, more, less fruity, more acid, more tannins, less soft, more serious. That's what I would love to do. I guess that's what I love to drink and what I'm trying to make. So, like I said, that probably won't happen, which is why I'm sitting here broke, right? And we're all scraping, which isn't quite true, but push, pound. That's what I hope happens.
I don't want to open up a can of worms, but what about the low calorie, low alcohol ones you're seeing pumped out now?
Well, there was Zima, there was Bartles and James, there was all these things. Zima really isn't much different than these wine coolers, not wine coolers, but like whatever they are, White Claw. Zima and
seltzer
are really the same thing, except Zima had a ton more sugar. So I don't think I think it'll go away. I think that's a fad. I think it'll go away the way Bartles and James went away, the way Zima went away. It's just gonna blip, and then something will replace it, and it'll be the new big thing in 10 years, and then something will replace that. And that stuff doesn't concern me at all, because it's undrinkable. So things that are undrinkable, I don't really see having longevity.
Yeah, I see Chardonnay not changing much over the time. I think the styles. I think we went through a whole lot of styles through our conversation, and I really believe Burgundy hasn't changed in 300 years, and I think Chardonnay will have its place. Stylistically, most probably some people will chase the oak regime and some people will go to the unoaked regime. But, to start adulterating and removing alcohol, the first thing you remove is flavors before you remove alcohol. So lower alcohol Chardonnay, and that facility, we can leave that for Pinot Grigio and the other varieties that's, that is around. But I think Chardonnay will stand its man, and it will be here for the next 20 years at least.
Great. Well, I think we'll bring this to a close for now. Certainly a conversation that can keep going, and please, reach out to us to help facilitate and keep that conversation going with any of our 4 winemakers or on any of the points discussed. I invite anyone who has a glass with them to raise it now. And it doesn't work with the background, does it?
Somehow mine got empty.
Yep, fill those glasses. Thank you again for joining us for this discussion on all things Chardonnay. Special thanks to our winemakers, Pieter Ferreira of Beck, Anthony Beckman of Balletto Vineyards, Sharon Fenchak of Biltmore Winery, and Paul Clifton of Hahn Family Wines. And so on that note, cheers to Chardonnay.
Cheers. Cheers.
Great to meet
Thank
everybody.
you all.
Great to meet you all. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.